Firstly, inflation is a rise in the price of goods within an economy, impacting citizens like the country Turkey. The country's economy's resistance to inflation is linked to policies and measures that address the needs and vulnerabilities of its population. In the early 2000s, Turkey launched economic reforms to stabilize the economy, contain inflation, and build a more investor-friendly environment. However, Turkey faces structural challenges such as high external debt, trade imbalances, and dependence on foreign finance. The country's currency, which is the Turkish lira, has been a concern, and currency depreciation has been a constant battle. Geopolitical tensions, political uncertainty, and the COVID-19 outbreak have complicated Turkey's economic environment. And the Central Bank of the Republic of Turkey has had to limit inflation while pursuing other economic goals. Inflation dynamics in Turkey during 2001 until 2022 are critical as the country faces a confluence of domestic and global factors, supply chain interruptions, currency swings, and internal structural issues.
The word inflation, while often synonymous with price increase, has its original meaning as a rise in the general price level caused by an imbalance between money supply and trade needs. Inflation is a term used to describe the general increase in price of goods and services over time. Inflation is a rise in prices which can be translated as the decline of purchasing power over time. The rate at which purchasing power drops can be reflected in the average price increase of a basket of selected goods and services over some period of time.
My name is Nur Nadira binti Rozani Sukri, and I will continue with the types of inflation. To begin with, the first type of inflation are demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation occurs when prices increase due to supply constraint, often due to a tight labor market. It occurs when aggregate demand exceeds aggregate supply, leading businesses to expand their workforce. 5 primary causes include a growing economy, growing export demand, government expenditure, anticipation of inflation, and increased monetary supply. For example, a low unemployment rate and low interest rates can lead to rising costs for fuel-efficient vehicles, but not all vehicles are affected. This type of inflation is known as too many dollars chasing too few goods. The second type of inflation is cost push inflation. Cost push inflation, also known as wage push inflation, is a type of inflation caused by rising input costs like labor and raw materials. This occurs when there is less of these commodities available due to rising manufacturing factor costs, leading to higher prices of goods even when demand remains constant. Common causes include increased production costs, mandatory wage increases, and natural disasters. However, not all natural disasters increase manufacturing costs, which could prevent cost-push inflation. For example, the 1970s oil embargo by OPEC led to a fourfold spike in oil prices. Last but not least, the third type of inflation is monetary inflation. Monetary inflation is a sustained increase in a country's money supply, resulting in price inflation. This is achieved through expansionary fiscal policies executed by the federal government and central bank authorities. One instrument used is lowering the required reserve ratio, allowing commercial banks to lend more and borrowers to take out larger loans. This leads to too much money chasing too few goods effect, creating inflation even though demand and supply have not changed. The quantity theory of money states a direct relationship between money supply growth and inflation.
So I will continue with the measurement of inflation. Usually the most well-known indicator of the inflation is the consumer price index. CPI is a measure of the average change over time in the price paid by urban consumer for a market basket of consumer goods and services. There are 4 stages to calculate the CPI, including selecting a base year that everything get compared to. For example, if you want to find the rate of inflation between 2021 and 2022, 2021 is the base year, or called as the first year in the time set. Many financial measures are based on growth because analysts seek to know how much a specific figure changes from one period to the next. Next is selecting the CPI basket of goods and services. A basket of goods represents consumer spending and is used to monitor changes in cost of consumer goods and services over time. There are some certain goods and services such as petrol and electricity supply that are so important to the household spending that they should be included in the basket. Third is conducting the monthly prices of selected goods. CPI measures the monthly change in prices paid by consumer. The economy assistant will visit or call thousands of retail stores and rental units throughout the country to gather data on the prices. After collect all data, they will then record the price of each item once a month and send to the community specialists to check for data accuracy and consistency. So here I come up with CPI formula. And lastly, giving weightage of relative importance for each category of goods and services. In actuality, the weight typically relate to household expenditure on consumer goods and services as opposed to the actual use of those products and services that fulfill household requirement and desire.
My name is Nuraina Jiha binti Muhammad Khair. I will continue with the effect of inflation. Have many effects that can impact countries with inflation problems, where nation will encounter purchasing power erosion, employee morale and productivity, and social and political implications. First, purchasing power erosion can happen when price for goods and services generally rise faster than incomes, and people can discover that their salary is insufficient to keep up with the soaring prices of products and services. Low salaries coupled with increasing living costs can lead to reduced employee morale and job satisfaction. That is employee morale and productivity. Last but not least, social and political implications will happen when economic prestations can have broader social and political implications that can contribute to social unrest and influence political sentiments and decisions.
Next, I would like to discuss problem and solution about inflation in Turkey. Turkey's inflation is primarily due to global exchange rate shocks and oil price fluctuations. With over 90% of its crude oil consumption coming from imports, Turkey's energy security is at risk due to its reliance on Iran and Russia. To address this, Turkey should diversify its oil supply and explore renewable energy sources like solar, wind, and geothermal. This will help meet Turkey's energy needs and reduce its dependence on imported oil. Other than that, the current account deficit in Turkey, driven by imports exceeding export, has worsened the economic situation and eroded government confidence due to inflation. Businesses are adjusting pricing strategies, seeking efficient production processes, and diversifying offerings to mitigate inflation, which is among the highest in Europe. Moreover, Turkey's economy faces high inflation, poor public finance management, and a fragile banking system. In 2001, the central bank became independent, adopted inflation targeting, and implemented fiscal reforms. President Tayyip Erdogan emphasized strict monetary policy to reduce inflation and maintain economic growth. The Central Bank of Republic of Turkey monitors the economic environment and makes monetary policy decisions. Next, Turkey's inflation is primarily due to its low interest rate policy, resulting in 115 basis point cut in its key interest rate. Despite the inflation exceeding 83%, the central bank has implemented tighter monetary policies, including increased reserve requirements for commercial banks, reduced credit availability, and open market operation to control inflation. Lastly, Turkey can overcome its low interest rate policies by implementing fiscal measures. Expansionary fiscal policy, which increases spending while decreasing taxes on infrastructure, education, and healthcare, can boost economic activity, create employment, and offset the negative effect of low interest rates. Targeted tax cuts can also encourage consumer spending and company investment. However, careful analysis is needed to ensure long-term economic stability.
As overall conclusion, inflation in Turkey is a complex issue, influenced by demographic dynamics, economic changes, geopolitical unrest, and the COVID-19 pandemic. It impacts people's purchasing power, standard of life, productivity, and employee morale. The inflationary environment is worsened by rising costs for necessities and demand for gas and oil. Next, the burden on households is worsening by reliance on credit and loans. To address the issue, Turkey needs to tighten monetary policy, increase interest rate, and implement fiscal measures. The government must also undertake expansionary fiscal policies, target tax cuts, and address structural difficulties. Achieving an efficient and sustainable economic future requires striking a balance between inflation management, social well-being, and economic growth.